It's 4 o'clock. Staff have the attendance in the building, and we do have a quorum.
Yes.
Has there been any public comment?
We have not received any requests to express it.
So next is the consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone would wish to have removed from the consent agenda?
No, I would move for approval.
Yes, move. Seconder? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any against?
Hi, Carlson.
Thank you, Carl. That motion's passed, so we'll move directly into the regular agenda. There were no items removed, so we're into number 6 on the agenda, items for information or discussion. Ray, were you going to introduce Jeremy?
Yes, if I may. If you recall, in recent past, we have had different presenters on different topics related to what we do, MCRPC. A lot of transportation, public works, transit, kind of different aspects. And today, kind of as the first of few more to come relate on the public housing, affordable housing side of planning, which you have heard updates on a regular basis from staff about housing situations and the different groups that we work with, including the Housing Authority of the City of Bloomington. So we are fortunate to have Jeremy joining us today. I'll let him to give a little bit detail in his background. He's spent quite a few years with the Housing Authority. He has a lot of good experience. We work together, staff here work together with him on a regular basis, whether through the Housing Staff Committee and through other the advisory committees and different issues related to housing, homelessness, and different aspects of CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant programs related to housing. And so, yeah, we'll also over time, we'll also invite different speakers, maybe on different aspects of housing, so that we all can learn, there's more than just the public housing side, but then also there are other aspects of housing issues in the King County area that we also face and try to come up with solutions. So with that, Jeremy, welcome, and you want to introduce yourself, go a little bit more.
Sure, happy to. My name's Jeremy Hayes. I'm the Executive Director of the Bloomington Housing Authority. I've been with the Housing Authority be 10 years in August, just these last 5 years as Executive Director. I have a slideshow here with about 18 slides. I won't dwell on all of those in detail. They're included with your agenda packet. I do have a couple that I might highlight, but first of all, I just want to express my appreciation to regional planning. I think it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe a little more, that I attended a meeting in this room, and that was at a time when MCRPC was looking to really expand their knowledge and work on housing issues. So I think we've had a great couple of years on these topics, and I appreciate the interest and the assistance that our agency has gotten from the staff of the Regional Planning Commission. Housing authorities are local independent units of local government, special purpose units of government that are primarily involved in administering federal programs, federally funded affordable housing programs. Those two largest programs are public housing, in which the agency owns and manages subsidized housing rental units, and the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. So I'll hit a couple of high-level points on each of those, and be sure to leave plenty of time for questions. Across the country, there are over 3,000 housing authorities. I think in Illinois, there's over 100. in many cases. We tend to think of public housing as being a large urban service. It is, in terms of the total number of housing authorities around the country, they're primarily actually countywide or more rural, small housing authorities. About 30% or so of the residents of public housing are elderly or disabled. In some cases, that's as many as 40 or 50% of any given housing authority's total number of residents that they serve. There are about 1.7 million Americans that live in 915,000 units around the country. That's actually a number that has decreased as housing authorities have transitioned their public housing portfolios in some cases to a different funding platform that HUD uses. I want to mention that not all affordable housing, even all subsidized housing, is managed by housing authorities. Here locally, there are a few examples that people may know of. Phoenix Tower, Lincoln Tower, Orlando Northbrook, or Anglers Manor. Those are all examples of HUD-funded, subsidized housing that offer income-based rents, but those are privately owned and they're subsidized through a HUD program called Project-Based Rental Assistance, or PBRA. From the tenant standpoint, the rent that they're going to receive is very similar. The calculation is similar. It's income-based. Income-based rent is the common thread for project-based rental assistance, as well as Section 8 and public housing. That is the benefit that is so critical for extremely low-income households. There are a couple of those different categories of income tiers: extremely low income, low income. The key thing to know locally is that we have very few situations where folks who apply for public housing are over income. The income threshold in McLean County is high enough at 80% of area median income that you only have to have for one person under $58,350,000 a year in income to qualify for public housing. We have in Bloomington 607 units. That's split up in 66 buildings. There are 9 sites in total. The public housing sites that people tend to recognize the name of or be most familiar with are Sunnyside, Holton Homes, Woodhill Towers, and the adjacent units of family housing that are at Woodhill as well. Tenants pay a rent, again, that's based on their income. It's 30% of adjusted monthly income. There is a minimum rent of $50 a month. The housing authority pays all the utilities except for electricity. That the Ameren bill is in the tenant's name. The utility cost is actually factored into the rent calculation. We have waiting lists that are established by unit size rather than by site. So somebody doesn't necessarily apply for a bedroom at Holton or a unit at Holton Homes. They're applying for a 2-bedroom unit, which would be what they qualify for based on family size, and then they're offered units that are sort of on an availability basis. The locations are primarily in the southwest quadrant of the community. Again, the larger units that folks, or sites rather, that folks may, let's go to, if I can go to
F5.
F5. That's the easy way to do it. Great. We'll get the full screen view. Sorry about that. Yeah, so folks are maybe familiar with Sunnyside Court, which is our largest family site. There are 100 units there. Holton Homes and John Kane, those units are actually, if I recall correctly, the units that were built first in the 1950s. Woodhill Towers and the family units were built in 1970. And then a few of these smaller sites, Irvin Apartments, McGraw, and Nearsteimer, those are our newest units, and they were built in 1982. So the housing stock, as in almost universally around the country for public housing authorities, is quite old. And that's one of our biggest challenges. The vast majority of households are at they're at the lowest income tier, meaning 30% of area median income. That's the extremely low income. So, there is a smaller portion that are at 50% of area median income. But again, the bulk of our population is in this extremely low income tier. There's actually a surprisingly small number of true zero income households. Sometimes people have this perception that residents of public housing, don't work. They don't have wage income, or they're truly zero income, and that's not the case. Many of our residents receive Social Security or have wage income. And one of the fortunate things about the labor market the last few years is that not only are more tenants of public housing finding work and getting in the workplace, but they have had incomes that have increased based on the labor market conditions. So that's a positive thing. Our housing authority revenue in general is, just point out, residents pay rent. Obviously, they're paying their portion of the rent. A few of them have considerably high rents, $500, $600, $800 or more even. But that's a smaller portion. A typical or average rent may be more in the neighborhood of, say, $300 a month. And based on that, the resident generated rent that we receive only makes up about a third of our operating budget. The remainder comes from our operating subsidy that's provided by HUD on a monthly basis.
Sorry to interrupt. I don't think the people on the other side are able to see.
Oh, okay. I'll let you fix that, sure. Each housing authority around the country has a little different composition in terms of how many units they have in public housing, how many units they have in Section 8. There are some agencies that are voucher agencies only. They don't own and operate public housing. They only administer a Section 8 voucher program. We have both. That's probably the most common arrangement. We actually have more vouchers at this point than public housing units. We have 680 active vouchers. There are about 200 different landlords, from our largest landlord, which would be apartment complexes. There are a couple of apartment complexes that have a significant number of vouchers, all the way down to mom and pop landlords that may only have a couple of units. The arrangement is similar from the tenant standpoint as far as the rent calculation. Their share of the rent is 30% of their adjusted monthly income. It is a sort of a three-way arrangement between the housing authority, the landlord, and the tenant. So our role is to pay that difference between the tenant's adjusted 30% of their share of the rent and the contract rent, up to a ceiling. Obviously, there are limits on programs like this. That's referred to as the payment standard. And communities can establish a payment standard anywhere between 90% and 100% of fair market, what's known as fair market rent, which is a statistical measure that's supposed to mark close to the midpoint of the rental market. So the idea is that housing authorities are not subsidizing high-end luxury rentals. They're subsidizing up to what represents about the midpoint of the rental market. It's a very high demand program. across the country in general, there's typically only one voucher available for every 4 households that would qualify. So many low-income renters out there are struggling, and in many cases paying 40, 50% of their income towards rent or more. The example here is just with some round numbers, is that and this is a little dated because you probably can't find a 2-bedroom apartment for $800 a month, but if the income of the client household is $1,500 a month, 30% of that is $450, and then the balance is paid from the housing authority to the landlord. That's called a housing assistance payment, or HAP check, that they receive every month. It's a guaranteed form of income to the landlord. So this program is beneficial, obviously, to the household that's receiving the subsidy, but landlords tend to like this program too. Sometimes there's some misunderstanding about what their rights are as landlords, but they are certainly protected by their lease and by other standards as well. So it provides a large amount of income to landlords who are participating as well. We do inspections, and there are various other requirements of the program. Utility allowances are factored in. So when we establish our payment standards and what our subsidy is, it's in terms of the gross rent, meaning the contract rent plus the cost of utilities. Some landlords, there's all the various combinations of how utilities are split up. But we're always looking at, for these programs, looking at that total cost of housing, which is the rent plus utilities. Between the hot rental market and the rising cost of utilities, it's put a tremendous squeeze on low-income renters, as you would expect in this last couple of years. There tends to be, these figures are from a few years ago. So the median household income for a Section 8 voucher participant has risen. I'd say this number is probably more around 15,000. But it's very a very common household composition in the voucher program, especially is a single-headed household, typically single moms with 1 or more children, and that is, you also see here, again, disabled head of household. In our case, this was at least 30% of our households had a disabled head of household. A pretty typical SSI check, is sometimes $800-900 a month. So you can imagine, without some subsidy involved, it's just simply nowhere near enough to have to be able to afford rent. African American households highly overrepresented in the program, and that's not uncommon. Looking at the age, a large portion of our population, like Woodhill Towers, for instance, is not a strict age limited program. So it's not you must be age 62. There's another category age tier below that, 55 to 61 is referred to as by HUD as near elderly. That is a large portion of our population. And, in some cases, it's folks that have a limited capacity to work. They don't have the full, they're not a full retirement age yet. So they struggle affording rent themselves. Just a table here just showing that the impact of vouchers in particular on their ability to reduce overcrowding of households, to reduce homelessness, and to reduce instability, housing instability. If you know or folks in your family or people that you know who are low-income renters, the prospect of instability is ever present. You're at the mercy of landlords increasing rent, of units that are no longer available, and in the case of families, especially families with children that are in school age, there are a number of studies that show that instability and frequent moves are detrimental to that household's odds for success long term. This was a few years ago, but at that time we had almost $2.5 million in housing assistance payment going out every year to landlords. I should mention too that technically there are 2 housing authorities that serve McLean County. Bloomington Housing Authority has all the public housing, and a portion of the vouchers flow through Bloomington Housing Authority. There is a McLean County Housing Authority that is a voucher-only agency. There are no employees. There is a separate board of commissioners, only meets quarterly, pretty limited scope for that entity. But that is just more sort of historical legacy. The 2 programs, we operate it as one program. So it's really seamless. If you're a landlord or a tenant, unless you're really looking at the fine print on your paperwork, you wouldn't know whether you have a BHA voucher or a McLean County voucher. But if you hear reference to that term, McLean County Housing Authority, it's all essentially operated by BHA. We try to think of housing as having affordable housing as having 2 benefits. It addresses an immediate need for a household, but it's also providing a foundation for long-term success and stability. And we look at it as opening a door to upward mobility. In addition to our regular housing programs, we have a couple of separately HUD-funded grant programs that are all about providing tools and coaching referrals to our residents intended to improve their earning potential, to address barriers that they have that are preventing them from being in the workplace, and to overall improve their well-being and their odds for success. Just a couple of our most recent issues as I wrap up here. Rising rents are, all over the news, but McLean County has had a very unique situation with an influx of new jobs, which is a great thing for the community. I would say that our clients are, in some cases, on both sides of that coin. We have many of our participants that are, have gotten jobs at Rivian, or some of the other employers in town that have been growing, and that's great. But as a renter household, they are also suffering from that success as well, because there's just a huge demand for rental housing right now. We have the opportunity just this year, sort of the final year for this, but we've actually increased our payment standard through a special exception up to 120% of what HUD publishes as the fair market rent. There's always a lag in these statistics that are published. So we're, hopefully going to gradually see that increase, so that we've got the ability to help folks get into apartments. Our public housing stock, as I mentioned, is aging, and we receive an annual capital fund grant allocation from HUD to reinvest, but it's challenging when the costs of construction are rising the way that they are. So there's, the dollar just doesn't go as far as it did a few years ago. We're always looking to try to increase public understanding of our programs and reach out to landlords to encourage their participation. Lastly, I mentioned that our waiting list for Section 8 was closed. This is almost embarrassing to say, but the waiting list was closed from 2014 until last November. That's a very long time. We've made some changes that we believe will make it work in a way that the waiting list will open more frequently. Fewer people will go on the list, but it at least provides some opportunity. So we went to an electronic-based application. We established some preference points, and we have the capability to do a lottery-based selection and make some other changes so that this list is not closed for so long. We now expect that it could open again as soon as later this year, toward the end of the year. One last thing I'll mention, that much of what gets developed now as affordable housing is not, I mean, there's hasn't been really any new public housing built in the country since the 90s. What you see being built as affordable housing now tends to be financed through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, LIHTC, or Section 42. And in some cases, as with the Lincoln Loft project on Four Seasons Road here in Bloomington, it was built about 2 years ago, there are a small portion of those units that have project-based vouchers attached. So the Housing Authority participated in that project so that out of the 56 total apartments, there would be a small portion of them, 17 specifically in that project, that would provide an income-based rent. The Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is great. It provides some upfront equity to facilitate development, but it doesn't provide income-based rents. It provides a fixed rent that is intended to be affordable to people at about 60% of the area median income. And that's an important population to serve, but it doesn't tend to get to those at that most needy income threshold. Went over my 15 minutes by quite a bit, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I would just encourage you, if you have other questions over time, I certainly appreciate anyone's interest in these programs. We're always looking for community partners that are interested in working with us to provide support or other types of services and assistance to our tenants and clients.
Jeremy, do the subsidies track with the need? I mean, like you said, with the median housing income or not housing income, but the price of rent and those kind of things, does it track with that at all relatively, or is it very behind?
It does track, but it lags. So what we get once a year is data released at the end of August. That is the new year's, the fair market rent that through whatever statistical analysis the HUD does, they say these are the new fair market rents. So by definition, those are always going to be a lag. I would say in a lot of ways that's probably as much as a year and a half sort of out of date by the time it actually kicks in. The other thing worth knowing is that housing authorities receive a cap on the total of, there's a cap established many years ago on the total number of vouchers that we can issue. But we also have an annual budget authority. So you're always working with two things, because we can't, we wouldn't be able to lease up our full number of authorized vouchers because we don't have enough budget authority. Over time, we can grow that, but again, there's a lag and you don't want to get into a shortfall situation. But sometimes people will ask, can't we just, issue more vouchers? And, that's really based on congressional allocations. And every year, Congress ultimately goes through their process of establishing the federal budget. eventually. Sometimes we've been through periods where that has been much delayed.
Right.
We've been through periods of the federal government shutting down, and all of those things are influencing how much we really have to work with to fund these programs.
Well, the reason I ask was if there was, some entrepreneurial people that decided, hey, I'm going to build,
Right.
start building housing, can we keep, and we could meaningfully do that in this community? Could you and the organization keep up with it based on the subsidies, or would the subsidies lag so far behind that it would really stack up?
Yeah, there is some lag, so that's a factor.
Thank you.
Jeremy, do your residents need to move out if they get up to the threshold?
It's a great question. It used to be that they did not, and there has recently been changes in federal regulation that we are required to establish over income procedures. By over income, you're actually allowed up to 120% of the threshold for admission. So there's some allowance to go even above. It's we don't have anybody who's even close to that threshold. The word is that this came out of some large public housing authorities that revealed people with six figures living in public housing in New York City. So all it takes is a few cases like that, and all of a sudden we have new rules. So technically, yes, in our local policies, we have to establish a process that would, if someone, once they are over income, then we would notify them, they would have, it's like 2 years to transition out. And frankly, here locally, the way I write, if they were at that income threshold, they wouldn't have any, if they were at the point where they were over income, they're not gonna have any trouble renting in the public sector or in the private market.
One other question, if I may, I don't mean to hog the time here, but do the landlords the landlords that you work with in Section 8 vouchers, for example, do they contract to stay in the program, or can they, if they find they don't like it, can they just drop out of it?
So that's a more difficult question to answer now, because in Illinois, the legislature approved a law, signed into law last year. Actually, I think it was in 2021, called source of income protection. So that doesn't force a landlord to participate in the program. It only prevents them from denying tenancy to someone who would otherwise rent to only on the basis of having a Section 8 voucher. So if certainly housing, and I would make this point, even with that source of income law. So what this basically prevents is a landlord from saying, when somebody calls them and says, I'm interested in applying for, your apartment, and they go through that process, and then they find out, oh, there's a voucher in the mix. They now cannot say, we don't accept Section 8. If they will meet their standards, and their landlords are still allowed to do screening for all kinds of things, criminal background, they can do credit checks, they can do other types of screening. They're just not allowed to simply, on the basis of participation in this program, or likewise, landlords in Illinois can no longer say, well, you have to have wage income. Social Security is protected as a source of income. So if you get SSI or disability income, landlords cannot distinguish between those sources of income.
Okay.
But a landlord can, for instance, let's just say you have one rental house, one rental property, and they have someone in the program who's in Section 8. That person moves out. They're not required to rent to someone in the future who has it. So we do have landlords who have sort of come in and out of the program over time. And they are allowed to certainly to terminate tenancy of people who are violating their lease, which would in turn get them in trouble with us in terms of the conditions of the program. So landlords still have plenty of protections.
Do you have any authority over the lease contracts at all?
We're required to get a copy of the lease. But we don't dictate. We don't say you have to follow a standard lease provision. They can add certain provisions that, the tenant also has the opportunity to say, I don't like that. I'm not comfortable with those terms. I'm going to go find someplace else.
Thank you.
Do you have any data that would help one understand how long an individual remains in subsidized housing once they enter it?
So we would have our own records on that. I can't say that I've done a sort of a recent report on that, but we have all of those. The raw data is there. There are so many different scenarios that it's hard to generalize.
Right.
There is a fair amount of turnover in the public housing program, less so in Section 8, although we have again had the positive experience of seeing more Section 8 tenants in the last few years get into that position where they're paying 100% of the rent, their income rises. Yes, that has gone up significantly these last couple of years as wages have improved. People have been able to get more hours and their incomes have gone up. There's obviously other situations, people move out of the community. When you're in the senior housing business, unfortunately, a lot of the turnover is folks that pass away or they go into nursing home care. So a lot of different scenarios, but I would say we have seen, an uptick in people who are transitioning off the program for those positive reasons.
Have you seen demand stay level?
Well, I would say, we had, when we opened the Section 8 waiting list in November, we were open, the list was open for 4 days. We received 4,800 roughly applications. Because we now have preference points in place, I think it was about 75% of those were from outside McLean County. But even if you look at the portion residing in McLean County that applied for, there's still a tremendous amount of demand for the voucher program in particular.
Thanks.
2 questions. So for those seeking assistance, is there something that has them be a better fit for public housing versus voucher, or is it just a matter of what's available?
That's a great question. Right now, for a household that is larger, and I'm going to say 4-bedroom or larger, those are going to be extremely hard to find in the private market, even if they have the voucher. And we have seen that with folks that are looking for we actually have 5-bedroom units, a few 5-bedroom units. So they're probably going to be better off getting a unit through public housing, quite possibly. So there's that thought. For those who, one of the advantages of Section 8 of the Housing Choice Voucher Program is the opportunity to move as your place of employment changes based on school district. There are folks that, if they've already started in the Unit 5, all of our public housing sites are District 87. So that's a consideration in some cases as well. Sometimes, tenants, even though they get a voucher, they really struggle for a number of reasons, finding a unit that is within the payment standards that meets their needs in other ways. So, in general, when it comes to low-income renters who are searching for affordable housing, we say over and over, you need to pursue as many options as possible.
The other question I have is for eligibility. I know a portion of our population here in the county that is not necessarily a citizen as a head of household. Does that impact eligibility there?
It does. At least one person in the household must be a citizen or permanent resident. And there's a category is considered a mixed household, where you can have an individual in that family who is basically saying they are not, there's some language that it makes it basically they're not providing their citizenship information, and we have to prorate the rent so that if you have, say, one person out of four in that household who cannot provide their citizenship eligibility category, you have to prorate the rent so that that person's share of the rent, so to speak, is unassisted. So it's one of those compromise types of situations that HUD established a number of years ago. But to answer the question, yes, at least one person in the household must either be a permanent resident, green card holder, so to speak.
I had one question. If you have renters and they become homeless for some situation, what's provided for them? Anything in the community?
Well, first of all, I think the most important thing for renters who are at risk of homelessness or are immediately going through that process, there is some assistance available, including a court-based rental assistance program, so that they may have some opportunity as they're working through the eviction process. Again, we're talking rent-based evictions. There may be some financial assistance to prevent that. So the most important thing is for people to call 211 to talk with the folks at PATH, who can look at, can determine whether there's any immediate assistance to prevent homelessness for a renter. Once the family becomes homeless, unfortunately, we don't have a designated program to provide immediate assistance. So when we get inquiries, for instance, somebody that says, hey, I just got evicted, or I'm at a shelter, I'm contemplating going into a shelter, we have to let them know that we're not an emergency housing provider. We may be an ideal solution, both primarily public housing, which has more availability of, but they need to recognize that process can take a while. So the first line of defense is the shelter systems, which is Home Sweet Home, Salvation Army, Safe Harbor, and that may be the immediate source of assistance for that family.
I find it amazing in this community, our school district has roughly 28 students a day that are considered homeless, and it's a struggle for them.
It is.
I'm not sure what the answer is, but we think in this community we can address that.
Yeah. It's a fair point, and that gets to an interesting point about different definitions of homelessness. So for some purposes, HUD classifies or defines homelessness as being truly either street homeless or being in a shelter. So that doesn't count situations that for other programs may be considered homeless, meaning that's a student who is staying with a family member temporarily, or they're in an unstable situation. So sometimes these definitions can be relevant in discussion too.
Other questions?
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much. It's been fascinating.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I appreciate the Commission's interest in affordable housing topics and appreciate the support of Ray and staff.
And you're more than welcome to stay with us while we discuss the remaining things. We don't have any more action items really, but.
Well, I may slide back to this chair, but I think I'm going to stick around. So I'm always interested to hear what this group is up to.
Well,
we'll carry on then. But to regional housing initiatives, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Just some regional housing initiative updates for the last month. Housing data and research updates over the last month. MCRPC staff completed the final draft of the white paper preservation of LIHTC. That's the low income housing tax credits and other income qualified housing in McLean County. The final draft will be presented at the next RHI Housing Staff Committee meeting. MCRPC staff submitted the Town of Normal Q4 CDBG report for program year 22-23. Staff also finalized and submitted the draft RISE housing grant request for proposals to county administration and legal staff for their review. In terms of local updates, MCRPC staff hosted the Regional Housing Initiative Staff Committee meeting, and we presented HUD and IDA updates and discussed zoning research. Staff participated in the monthly Housing Coalition meeting. MCRPC staff attended the monthly Invest Health meeting and presented relevant plans for the Invest Health Team spreadsheet, which summarized the coexisting plans on the MCRPC website, including the Bike and Ped Master Plan, Long Range Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and comprehensive plans for the city and town. Last but not least, we have training updates. MCRPC staff attended the National APA Conference online and learned about initiatives for affordable housing.
Thanks, Mark.
Any questions for Mark? Region 0, go save McLean County.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. As you recall, there are 3 grants that are associated with this related to transportation safety to IDOT, the current state grant, Illinois Department of Transportation, and then one federal grant called SS4A, Safe Streets and Roads for All federal program, all related to safety transportation. So they're in various stages of either having the agreement, the grant agreement done, or having the RFP, the request for proposal for vendors, under review by our administration and legal staff before we issue for inviting responses. So they're kind of into various stages. Any questions?
Might as well go right on to
The broadband.
Sure. As you recall, this is like a 14-week intensive kind of technical assistance program related to broadband. As you recall, you helped out in the survey not last month, because today is early May already. But in March, there was a survey done. So we received the countywide, we received 1,230 responses from that survey. And thank you all. I'm sure you all have part of it, and then the community also had to take part in that survey. So basically what that 14-week intensive covered: training, education, engagement program is coming toward the end tomorrow. In fact, it's the graduation, quote unquote, event. So McLean County is one of 5 counties selected for this technical assistance program. So for us, we have been having conversations with some interested ISP providers, internet service providers, just with a focus. Our focus, as you may know, is more for the rural part of the county, because the urban areas, got a lot of the broadband service already, and so a lot of the sectors, agriculture, farming, health, and education, to name a few, sectors that will be benefit by future installation of broadband, high-speed internet. And so having some conversations going on, and eventually the county board, would decide, what the next step should be. We'll put staff is supporting, our staff is supporting, along with some partners, supporting the county administration in come up with a plan, what the next step to be. And so all this kind of going on. So although the 14-week program is the end, it's coming to an end, but it's the beginning of a much impactful, more significant process. And so stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted. But in association with this broadband breakthrough program, the state of Illinois, through this DCEO, the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, they are doing kind of statewide listening sessions in different parts of the state, try to hear input, gathering feedback in terms of digital equity. And this is really for the states, their application to the federal government, for grants and other things on the digital equity. And so I know some you're interested in that area. And so there will be a listening session on the 16th in about 2 weeks, going to be held at ISU at the Miller Library. I'll email you after today's meeting. I'll email you the flyer. There will be 2 separate sessions that evening for government leaders, officials. You are all, since you're part of the RPC and you qualify for that. So that's the session starting at 5 o'clock, at 5 to 6, 1 hour. And then at 6:30 to 7:30, there'll be another session open to the public, to nonprofits. So you're definitely invited to the 5 o'clock session. But you can help us to get the word out, help the state, help us, McLean County area, to get the word out. This is also another opportunity for our community, our residents and businesses or whoever to convey or provide the feedback in terms of the digital divide or the internet service to the state, and so they can in turn tell the feds, because the feds they have a lot of money coming down in the pipe, and so also this is an opportunity for us to prepare ourselves, position ourselves for future funding opportunities. So I'll send flyers out after the meeting today. That's okay.
Any questions on this for Ray?
Is the flyer available? When we receive the flyer, are we permitted to share it publicly?
Yes. So I will I'll share 2 flyers, but don't get mixed up, because you might say one is for the government leaders like you all, but the other one is for the public. Yes, definitely please help us through the school districts and whatnot, and others, employees, higher ed and whatnot. Please get the word out. So that will be in person on the 16th. Now there's a virtual session. It was actually planned by the state. One for the residents actually tomorrow, which is kind of short time, but just for people who cannot make it. And also there will be one on May the 9th for the nonprofits, just for the virtual ones. And now there will be translation if people need Spanish and other languages. So they can contact the state. There's phone number, contact information that they can contact the state in advance, and they will provide translation services through headphones at those meetings. So free parking, ISU on the 16th. So thank you. Yep.
Thank you, Ray. In terms of business arising, one thing I wanted to mention was to thank Jennifer for her service. I see that she has left the meeting she was attending during Jeremy's presentation, but she's gone. She is leaving the commission now because of a time conflict with the new job. So she won't hear this, I guess, but I wanted to wish her well in the new job and thank her for her service to the commission as a commissioner. Maybe we can find a way to pass that on by email or something.
Yeah, I actually kind of have done that earlier today.
Yes, I saw that too.
I can reiterate on behalf of the commission.
She also had a nice thank you from the mayor of Bloomington, because she was appointed by the city to do her role. So she had a nice email from him thanking her for her service also. Is there anything else anybody would like to bring up?
All right, I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against?
Aye.
Thank you. We're done, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.